Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the absolute greatest mysteries and honestly most fascinating stories in all of human history. We're looking at the ultimate historical paradox. How did the most powerful civilization on Earth, a civilization that literally shaped global politics, law, architecture, and culture, somehow completely collapse? We're going to examine the decay and fall of the Roman Empire and perform a step-by-step autopsy of a superpower. People believed Rome was unstoppable. The empire looked eternal. And looking back, it's really easy to see why. At its absolute peak, the Roman Empire was a colossus. It stretched all the way from the freezing rains of Britain in the north to the blazing sun of Egypt in the south, from Spain in the west way over to parts of the Middle East. We're talking massive cities, incredibly disciplined soldiers, and roads that connected entire continents. To the people living inside it, the idea of Rome falling was like imagining the sky falling. There was just no way. Yet, the civilization that ruled the world for centuries slowly weakened until it just couldn't survive anymore. Okay, let's dive into this. The core question of our autopsy today is simple, but the answer is incredibly complex. Why did the Roman Empire collapse? Historians have been debating this for centuries, and the absolutely crucial point here is that Rome did not fall in a single day. It wasn't just one huge catastrophic event. Instead, it was destroyed slowly. It was a combination of internal decay and external pressures. But to really understand the disease that killed it, let's first look at the baseline of Rome's health. So our story actually begins right in the middle of Rome's golden age, around the 2nd century AD. The empire experienced what's known as the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. Under wise rulers like Augustus, Trajan, and Marcus Aurelius, Rome reached the absolute height of its power. Trade was booming. This is the era of those incredible engineering marvels you always hear about, right? The aqueducts, the massive bridges, huge arenas like the Colosseum. Citizens were protected by the strongest army in history. This was the empire at its absolute healthiest. But beneath this glorious surface, some pretty serious pre-existing conditions were already starting to grow. Section 1. Political instability. A deadly game of power. The real turning point here was the year 1880. This marks the death of the emperor Marcus Aurelius. Now, by this point, Rome had become heavily dependent on having strong, wise emperors in charge just to keep things running smoothly. So when Aurelius died, the empire entered this incredibly dangerous period. Chaos spread like wildfire. The Roman throne essentially became a revolving door. At one point, the Praetorian Guard literally auctioned off the title of emperor to the highest bidder. Emperors were being assassinated so regularly that some of them only managed to sit on the throne for a few months before being overthrown or murdered. The sheer depth of the political corruption was just staggering. You had military generals fighting each other for control. The soldiers themselves were the ones choosing the emperors. And here's the kicker, they weren't choosing them based on who was actually a good leader. No, they chose them based on who could pay the biggest bribes and literally buy their loyalty. Politicians completely stopped caring about protecting the empire and only cared about their own personal wealth. Laws became unfair, trust in leadership just vanished, and as a result, taxes had to be dramatically increased just to fund all this corruption. Section 2. Economic crisis. The price of empire. Running that massive Roman army alone required astronomical amounts of money. You gotta pay soldiers, build forts, defend borders that stretch for miles. To cover this, the government slapped a crushing tax burden on poor citizens and farmers, who often ended up losing their land to the wealthy elites. But the emperors still needed more money, and they needed it fast. And this brilliantly illustrates the devastating chain reaction of inflation that they triggered. Step 1. Emperors started reducing the amount of real silver in their coins so they could just mint more money. Step 2. Obviously, this naturally caused the value of Roman currency to totally plummet. Step 3. Prices for absolutely everything skyrocketed. And Step 4. The ultimate result, ordinary people couldn't afford basic goods anymore, completely destabilizing the whole economy. But honestly, the economic death spiral didn't even stop there. Rome had built an economy that relied heavily on enslaved workers captured during their wars of conquest. As long as the empire was expanding, cheap labor just kept flowing in. But once Rome stopped growing, fewer slaves entered the empire. This created massive labor shortages. And because they had relied so heavily on that cheap labor for so long, they hadn't even bothered to invest in new technologies. So innovation completely ground to a halt, crippling their economy even further. Section 3. Military decline. Defending the indefensible. The Roman army used to be feared across the world. They were highly trained, incredibly disciplined, and fiercely loyal. But after years of endless war, crushing taxes, and terrible leadership, the patriotism of the average Roman citizen was just destroyed. People simply didn't want to join the army anymore. So what did Rome do? They started hiring foreign mercenaries from Germanic tribes to fill up the ranks. But these mercenaries, they were fighting for a paycheck, not out of any loyalty to Rome. And relying on armed groups who don't actually care about your country is a recipe for absolute disaster. In fact, some of them would later turn their weapons directly against the empire. Adding to this whole military strain was just the sheer size of the empire. The borders stretched thousands of miles across Europe, Asia, and Africa. It was simply too large to defend effectively. Recognizing this, Emperor Diocletian made a massive decision in 285 AD. He literally divided the empire in two. The Eastern Roman Empire, over in Constantinople, was wealthier, it had better trade routes, stronger defenses, and much more stable leadership. It would actually survive for nearly another 1,000 years as the Byzantine Empire. But the Western Roman Empire, it was pretty much left to rot. It faced constant invasions, severe economic decline, and terrible leadership. It was struggling just to keep its head above water. Now, there were other profound internal stressors pulling at the fabric of Roman society at the exact same time. The spread of Christianity in the 4th century significantly changed the empire's identity. While historians do debate its exact impact, it certainly shifted values away from traditional Roman military strength and loyalty to the state. On top of that, devastating plague swept through, killing millions and severely weakening both the workforce and the army. And modern studies even suggest that shifting climate conditions negatively affected agriculture, causing widespread food shortages. While these definitely weren't the sole causes of the collapse, they were massive, added stressors on a system that was already falling apart. Section 4. The Invasions. The Final Fatal Blows. For centuries, Rome had successfully defended its borders against foreign groups they lumped together as barbarians. Basically a catch-all term for tribes like the Visigoths, the Vandals, Franks, and Huns. But because Rome's internal structure was now so completely hollowed out, the army really struggled to respond quickly. The borders became porous, and these invasions went from being a nuisance to becoming far more frequent and incredibly devastating. The real catalyst for the final collapse came from the east. Attila the Hun, one of history's absolute most feared conquerors, began a series of brutal campaigns that totally terrified Europe. And he wasn't just attacking Rome directly. His campaigns were actually pushing other fleeing barbarian tribes straight into Roman territory. It's like a giant domino effect. This cascading pressure on Rome's borders became completely unbearable. The dam was literally about to break. Let's trace how rapidly this builds to a catastrophic end. In 410 AD, the unimaginable actually happened. The Visigoths, led by King Alaric, invaded and sacked the city of Rome itself. It was the first time in nearly 800 years that Rome had fallen to an enemy. The psychological shock to the ancient world was enormous. That illusion of invincibility was completely shattered. Then, in 455 AD, the Vandals attacked, looting treasures and tearing the city apart even further. Finally, the terminal blow. In 476 AD, a Germanic leader named Odoacer simply removed the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, from power. And just like that, the Western Roman Empire was officially dead. The empire that once ruled the known world had entirely collapsed. Section 5. The Ghost of Rome. A Timeless Warning. But the empire never truly disappeared from human memory, did it? Roman law formed the foundation of our modern legal systems. Roman architecture inspired buildings all across Europe and the Americas. The Latin language evolved into Spanish, French, Italian, and Portuguese. And deeply ingrained Roman ideas about government, citizenship, and engineering, they're still the absolute bedrock of our modern world today. And this is exactly why today, historians and analysts constantly look at modern superpowers and compare them to ancient Rome. Whenever modern countries exhibit severe political division and corruption, whenever they face crippling economic crises and wealth inequality, or whenever they suffer from military overexpansion and a reliance on fractured alliances, historians raise the alarm of a fall of Rome scenario. The underlying causes that broke the ancients are the exact same risks threatening modern nations right now. Which leaves us with this final, frankly provocative truth. No empire is eternal. Wealth, military power, and advanced technology alone absolutely cannot guarantee survival if corruption, division, and inequality are rotting a nation from the inside out. The Roman Empire didn't collapse overnight, right? It slowly weakened for centuries under the weight of its own success and its internal failures, until it just couldn't survive the external pressure anymore.
So as we look at the world around us today, seeing the echoes of Rome in our own politics, our economies, and our societies, we have to ask ourselves, are we learning the lessons of the fragile Colossus, or are we just repeating